Hi, I'm Phil Sauntry. I'm here with Ron Tredway, the owner of the exquisitely beautiful Cobra number 26. And we're going to talk a little bit about the car and Ron's history with it. So why don't we start by saying, when did you first encounter this car?
Well, I had just had my street car destroyed. Somebody hit it in front of work, and so I was flush with money, and I decided maybe I'd take a look at the Cobras. Even the same time I was looking at Hemi Challengers, but I happened to go down Stevens Creek Boulevard, and there was a place called Jack London Imports that had some cars on consignment there, actually some cars for sale, 3 Cobras, and I looked at them and I happened to see this one, and I thought it was pretty racy with the roll bar and the stripes and the mag wheels, and a guy named Bob Shiro across the street had a nice gold 427 for sale, and they were about the same price, and I went home and thought about it, and then I came back on Saturday to make an offer on the car, and it was gone. So I thought, oh my goodness, and so yeah, the next weekend I was reading the paper and there was another Cobra for sale in the paper, and I called the guy up, and sure enough it was this car. He'd pulled it off the consignment lot and stayed home, decided he was going to sell it himself, and so I went down and visited, and we took a ride for the car one evening, and that was it. We came back, and $5,000 later, you know,
that was
home.
Roughly what year?
That was in 1969.
So at that point the car was 4 years old, roughly.
Right. It actually had 58 or 9,000 miles on it. Somebody had used it well.
Was it local?
This guy had it for about 2 years, so he'd been most time. But the car was brought up from Southern California to Hayward Ford, and I think the high performance manager there owned it for a while. But somewhere along the line, it made some trips back and forth to the East Coast. I had a gas chip out of the glove box that I found wedged way back in from Pennsylvania. So,
wow.
So it had been around. It was an attractive car, but it had its blemishes by then, you know.
And the configuration at that point was strictly a street.
It was narrow hip. The rear valance on the car had been cut off to put very tall tires for autocrossing in the back. But other than that, it was pretty much street configuration. The layout of the car from Shelby was they took a lot of the race parts, the suspension, brake scoops, roll bar, hood scoop, Coney shock absorbers, and they put the mag wheels. They put the race suspension on it, but left the stock street motor, and that was just because it was an autocross. They figured we could.
At the beginning, was Shelby working with the AC Ace or the AC Bristol, or both?
Well, he was working for the AC motor cars, you know,
period.
which made the Ace and the Bristol, you know, and when they lost the source for the Bristol motor, you know, they had a chassis without an engine, and somehow Shelby figured that out. In the meantime, we had this small block thin wall casting 221 cubic inch V8 that Ford was making in mid '62, and he made a deal. And
what happened to this car then after you got it? You just enjoyed it for a while, or did you start fiddling with it?
Oh yeah, immediately. It was in 6 months we blew a head gasket in the motor, so we took it apart and hopped it up, and so then I autocrossed it for a while. We did some drag racing with it. In 1973, it was running on the street with 12.5-to-1 pistons and shaved heads, and when the oil embargo happened, we ended up with leaded gas, and that killed it. We cracked 8 pistons and 3 cylinder walls, and pushed it in the corner of the garage, and pretty much stayed there for the next 30 years.
Wow. And when did you start putting it back together so that it turned out the way we see it today?
Well, actually, we started doing little bits and parts, but probably 10 years ago when we moved from the Bay Area to Oakdale, we went out, and my wife's father was pretty good handy, and he started working on it, just cleaning stuff up, pulling parts out, shining them up, and in about 3 years, we got that thing pretty well dolled up. You know, we went down to the big show down to Peterson for the collection of Cobras, and it was just sparkly with polished rims and everything. Just didn't have an engine in it yet. And then about about 18 months ago, we had it all pretty much done, except we cleaned up everything we could, but the one part that was starting to look really stand out was the foot boxes, because they're fiberglass. They're put in one of the first things that are put on the chassis, and they're tubes that are welded in over them, and they're just impossible to get out without taking the body off of the frame. And I took it over to my good Cobra friend Drew Serb, who was doing restorations, and we looked at it and we decided that the car was nice enough that it deserved to have the whole deal, and so it was kind of in for a nickel in for the whole thing. And so we took the body off and took the frame, sandblasted down, powder coated it, and then put in the new foot boxes and put the body back on.
Did you do those in fiberglass again, or did you go to?
They're fiberglass again. Yeah. They're original style, the remakes. You can't tell the difference. So then everything looked good. And then, of course, Drew took it one step further and replaced some of the damaged aluminum panels from an accident that it had early in its life, and pretty much straightened it.
That always turns up, doesn't it? The accident earlier in its life.
We found that out when I had it up on a rotisserie with just the body and the chassis, and I looked up at the cowl hoop. It's about an 1.5 inch tube that goes over in front of the cowl hoop, and it had been sectioned. So what the way the car came to be was that Shelby had a guy working for him named Chuck Green, and Chuck was an autocrosser in the autocross Corvettes. His wife also worked at Shelby, and she was a parts manager. And Shelby came over and said, "Look, I just hear you autocross Corvettes. We can't have that right now. So why don't you go take one of those Cobras and fix it up so you think you can be competitive and go out and promote the car?" And they did that. In fact, Deke Holgate, the PR manager for Shelby, did a press release on the car calling it the Slalom Special, the half race, half street car. Well, Chuck took it out and he raced and he won the Southern California A Production Autocross Championship, and his wife won the Women's A Production Championship. He was the founder of the Southern Cal Cobra Club and became a really good friend of Lynn Parks. But he did hit a light pole with this thing, and he brought it in, and Shelby said, "I think it's time you got your own car." They fixed it up and sent it up to Hayward Ford as a demo.
We've just experienced some interruption with some pre-race revving down the road. Sounds absolutely wonderful, a lot better than my voice. But anyway, so now we're back, and continue.
Well, we just had the joyous sound of a NASCAR 180-degree header Cobra down the street, so we had to stop and listen. But the car was shipped up to Hayward Ford as a demonstrator, and that was about in mid-65. And then from 65 to 67, we think it was owned by the people at Hayward Ford. I've got a fellow that's going to fill me in on that I just met this weekend. So there we go again. Well, I bought it in '69 from a fellow who had been driving it on the street since about '67. He worked for PG&E.
Well, you know what? While I have you, I heard a story as a kid from one of my uncles. It was the first introduction I ever had to the term Cobra, and he described how they had run them at Riverside against the Corvettes, cleaned up the Corvettes pretty dramatically, and at the end of the day, the Cobra guys were going around giving snake bite kits to the Corvette drivers, and I've never had any idea whether it was a true story or not, but I've always loved it.
It is a true story. In fact, there's some documentation that shows actually the kits and the signs that they used in the pits. And I'm trying to think from that Riverside race where the very first one, where Dave McDonald and Billy Krause went out and ran really well, but they had to come in early with teething problems. But I'm trying to remember, I think it was Duntoff that said, "Well, there's, the writing's on the wall. That's it. We're going to have to do something different."
Well, that's interesting. So I understand that you have one more race this afternoon, and then I heard from an unimpeachable source that the racing is over and we're going to go back just pretty much to show and having fun.
I think that's probably true. At least for this car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it, because the motor isn't competitive, and I don't want to go faster than it already goes.
Wow, we've got a lot of noise in the background. Talk a little bit about driving the car on the track.
Well, I've had had conversations with a number of guys, and of course it's been a long time since I drove it, and I've never driven on a track before, but they all asked me, since I've been racing a Mustang or a Shelby for a number of years. He says, how do you deal with the difference? And I said, they are different. They're similar, but they're different. The Shelby, you come into a turn, you brake in a straight line, you make your turn, you do a constant speed, light throttle to gauge the amount of road this thing's going to use and try and sweep it through the apex, and then you pour on the gas, still gauging how much roads you're going to use before you're done. The Cobra, being rear end bias, a little more tire in the back, you make that turn in a straight line, then you turn it, and then you put more than just a little gas, a good scoot of gas at it, and aim it with it, because instead of sliding out, as you add the gas, the nose points in towards the apex, and so you want to keep it aimed there, but you don't want to put it too much because that rear end will want to come around on you. So you're steering that thing with a throttle from the point you turn until you're straight, and then you want to make sure when you really nail it that it's pointed straight, because if it's not, it's going to go one way or the other.
You're going to get there fast.
Yeah, real quick.
Yeah.
Because that short wheelbase, it just goes boom, boom. I don't know how the Tiger guys do it. You know.
Since we're kind of doing this a little bit for posterity, is there anything else about the car that we ought to record?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. You mean other than me getting arrested for drag racing in front of Stanford and El Camino? But, I think, gosh, I guess they're only. I guess probably this promotion on the car was in late '64, and it was done to help sell, leftover. They were having trouble moving the last of the Cobras. So in the end, there was only 2 of them that were made and sold. This was the prototype, the first one, because the Chuck Green drove it, and then a couple of car numbers later, I think it's 2537, was also sold in the same configuration. The only difference is it had a black roll bar instead of a chrome one, and that's currently in the Shelby Museum in Colorado, owned by Pat Hogan, and Pat and I coordinated on both of the restoration, the colors, and everything else. And he wanted to be here, but there are just 2 of them. The Greens, when they had to buy their own car, they went on to buy another car, and they raced that for a couple more years and just swept all sorts of Southern California Championship. And as I said before, he was the founder of the Southern California Shelby Club and a close personal friend and mentor to Lynn Park.
I seem to remember hearing that the Cobra was not a commercial success initially.
I don't think so. I don't think how it could have been. It was just some excuse to support the racing. Absolutely. And then, of course, they only made 300 427s. They were probably less so than even the 289.
Yeah. I can't think of anything else to ask you, but I would assume, looking down on this event today, that Carroll Shelby's grinning ear to ear somewhere and telling a lot of people a lot of stories.
Oh, I'm sure. And then, of course, this event has pulled a lot of cars out of the closet, so it's really great to see them. And it's a good time to do this, because I don't know how soon it's going to happen again.
Yeah. No, it's terrific. It's a privilege to be here. Great talking to you. Thanks very much.
Love it.
Righto.
You bet. Goodbye. Thanks.